Hi, everyone. This is Mickey Hudson, and I am hosting today's PFAFF Facebook Live. So, as I usually do, I'm going to have you guys come on in, have a seat, get cozy, um, and get comfortable. Today, we're going to be talking about buttonholes from the basic 5-step buttonhole all the way up to embroidered, and lots of tips and tricks, lots of helpful hints, and I love questions. So feel free to ask questions. As always, just want to remind everyone not to click on any links that do not come from us. And if you do click on a link and it asks for any kind of personal information, that is not from us. We work very hard to keep it out of here. But if you happen to run across one, just know it's not from us. So if you would please report it, that would be awesome. And when I say we, I'm talking about my behind the scenes crew. And I would like to say thank you to Meredith, Amy, and Ryan, because without them, none of this would be possible. So a big shout out to them. Thank you. Thumbs up, happy face for the behind the scenes crew, because they are awesome. So without further ado, let's get started on buttonholes. Now, buttonholes, some people may think when you talk about buttonholes, you're just talking about garments. And yes, it is true that buttonholes are in clothing primarily. However, there are buttonholes in handbags, in home deck, in all kinds of stuff, even quilts. You can use them for decorative effect, and they're just super cool. I do know from all my years of teaching that some folks struggle with buttonholes. So I'm hoping that today we can alleviate that and have you have some successful, beautiful buttonholes. So the first thing that I'm going to start with is sorry, let me switch my camera view. Let me switch my camera view again so you can get a better view. So first I want to talk about some of the tools that I use. I do love to have really sharp, pointed scissors. So whether it is something like this or otherwise, I like a nice, sharp point when I'm doing buttonholes, and I'll talk about why. I know some of you like these little fancy blades here, and they will work. However, I strongly advise against them because they're very hard to control when doing a buttonhole. They are great for taking out seams, however, or stitches. So they are a must-have in my opinion, but not for buttonholes. Okay. And when I say not for buttonholes or don't do this or don't do that, I am really kind of relying on my personal information and my experience. I am not forbidding it by any means because everybody has their own thing that works for them. So you may give it a try, or you may already use one of these and love it. I'm not saying that you can't use it. The other thing that I really recommend, so when it comes to opening the buttonholes, I personally like either using my scissors or my buttonhole chisel. Now, a buttonhole chisel can be found at most of your dealers' stores, and it'll either come with a little cutting mat or a little wood block, usually shaped like an apple or another shape. But these are fantastic for cutting buttons. I also highly recommend a fray block, fray check, or fray stop. Those can also be done at your local, gotten at your local dealers. My personal preference, although all three of them work really well, my personal preference is the fray block that comes in a tube. One of the things that I like about that is that it doesn't harden over time. So when I wash it and dry it and have it out for a long time, it doesn't turn hard and crunchy. Some of the others can do that over time. Okay. But not to impugn them because they are a great product as well. So any questions about any of that I rambled through really quickly? I did talk fast because I want to get into showing you stuff. So, all right. So the first thing that I am going to be starting with, like I said, whoops, wrong camera, is the this is usually the 5-step buttonhole. Now, this is the one that will come on your ambition or on your passport, and they can be found in other brands of machines as well. And I do not have an ambition or a passport, so I will not be able to show you how to actually use it, but I will kind of talk you through it. So one of the things is that on the back here, there is the slider, so you can add your button. So whatever button you use, it'll do up to about a 2-inch button, I think. And I'll talk about how to do bigger buttons if I have time. But when you have this buttonhole foot, you're just going to slide the button on and slide the little attachment holder here so that it fits nice and snug. What this will do is this will now make the buttonhole this size. And it does that by using these little gadgets here. So on your machine itself, I'm going to just change my angle a little bit. So on your ambition or passport, up inside here, you will have a little lever that it'll say pull, or you'll see a little buttonhole icon, and that you will pull down, and you will select your buttonhole. And what that does is as the buttonhole is stitching, it will come down, it'll start the buttonhole, and then it'll hit that little pull down lever, and that tells it to do the bar tack across the top, and then come back down. And when it hits this where it started, it will do the bar tack across the bottom. So if you think about a traditional buttonhole has a bar tack at the top, a bar tack at the bottom, and 2 rows of the zigzag. So depending on the machine you have, sometimes it will run up and across, sometimes it'll come down and across, but what you'll do is you'll just pull that little lever down right in here, and it will do the work for you. So very, very exciting. So I'm going to set that aside. Now, the other one is the manual buttonhole. So this is the manual buttonhole, and this is if I want to, you will find these on the electronic machines, and basically up the line, once you get past the Ambition series, you'll start seeing this guy. And this is the manual buttonhole. This will allow me to make buttonholes all different sizes. So if I want to go over the 2 inches, I can. However, again, if I have some time, I'm going to show you a pretty way to do really large buttonholes. But this is the manual. We're going to be talking about this. This is the Sensormatic buttonhole, and this one will plug into the back of your sewing machine, your PFAFF sewing machine. And on this one, you tell it what size button you're working with, and it'll do it. So let's get started. Okay. So the first thing that this is another gizmo that I love to use that you should have in your sewing kit. So this guy is a buttonhole gauge. It's got all kinds of different names depending on who's manufacturing it. But if you check with your local dealer, I'm sure they have one of these in their Notion section. And this is really awesome. So let's say I wanted my buttonholes 3 inches apart. I actually lay this down right on my ruler, and I will measure this out from this point, where the bottom of the V to the bottom of the V, and I'll measure that to be 3 inches. Then I can come and just take this and line it up along the edge of my fabric and put my marks in like so. So obviously I'm not 3 inches. These are all 3 inches apart. But it makes it really easy to do a repeat of anything. Any project I have where I'm going to repeat something, this comes in very, very handy because I can get all the marks super, super easy to learn. Easy to just line them all up without having to do a whole lot of work. So again, check with your local dealer because they're amazing. Every sewing kit should have one. What was the manual buttonhole cover? So here, look at a sample while I run it. Get that. It's right on my desk here. Okay. So the number for that is 416-483-201. Sorry. So I had the little package here because I just ran out and got this today for you. So I just happen to have the button handy. Sorry about that. I had a little something fall. All right. So we're going to start with the manual buttonhole. Now, one of the tips and tricks that I really, really, really recommend, I cannot recommend enough, is to properly stabilize your buttonhole. So here you'll see, I have some interfacing here, and it's just a fusible interfacing. One of the big things is you want to make sure that you use the same weight of interfacing as the fabric. So you don't want to use a super light interfacing on a heavy fabric. You want to try and match the weight of the stabilizer with the weight of the fabric. Now, in this case, I actually did use a lighter weight just so that I can show you some examples. And then I have a heavier weight in some of the others. But this is the stabilizer. Another thing that I don't have right here, I wasn't planning on showing it, but I will talk about it, is using a topper stabilizer. So like the heat away, the clear and melt, or the water soluble, on top. So especially with high pile fabrics like wools and velvets and stuff like that, I will always put a topper on top of the buttonhole as well, because that will just make those stitches stand out on top of that fabric. It makes it just stand right at attention. So it's very, very cool. So we're going to go ahead and put on the manual buttonhole foot. And I'm going to switch over to my screen here. So depending on, I am on the Creative Icon 2. However, whatever model that you have, you will be able to have these stitches as well. But you'll find the buttonholes in your main menu of the utility stitches. It's usually the right in the first menu, etc. So I'm going to come down to my buttonholes, and I'll just select a buttonhole. Now, the higher you up you go in the levels of machines, the more buttonholes you will get. So if you don't see all of these on your machine, either don't worry, or you can always trade up. But there, you will usually at least have a like a shirt buttonhole, and you may have a keyhole buttonhole, usually more like this one. So most machines will have at least those, and then the other are just kind of optional for other things. So, okay. So let me move this over. Get this in a good spot. Now, one of the things when it comes to working with the buttonhole, the manual buttonhole, you will see, I'm going to zoom in a bit. You will see here that there is an arrow on the screen. So this arrow is letting you know which direction it's going to start in. So it's letting me know that it's going to start down here and then stitch up. If you see the arrow going in the opposite direction, it'll start at the top and come down. This is very helpful for letting us know where to place our button before we start. Okay, back out. The other thing that you want to see, all right, I'm going to change my view because I want to zoom in and don't make it as easy. So the other thing that you will see is a reverse button symbol there. So there's that little U-turn looking guy. Now on the creative icon too, it's up at the top. I think on the creative icon and the performance icon, it's at the top. For like the creative sensations and those, I think it's over on the side or in the, not in this big screen, but on your window, it'll be over on the side in that area. But you will see a little reverse, the U-turn reverse symbol. Okay. So any questions about what I've talked about so far? All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come here. So now when you look at this foot too, these little marks are going to be measurements from the point of where the needle starts. So depending on where you want to put your button placement or the edge of your buttonhole from the edge of your fabric, you can use these as your focal point guides. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, I did not mark this too well. So usually when I personally do my clothing for real, rather than just marking pieces of fabric, is I use the buttonhole placements usually on the pattern. It'll let you know. So I will often just mark those and I'll just put like a dot and then I come back in later and create the lines. But usually that little dot that I mark is where it starts. And usually in most commercial patterns, the edge of the fabric here, the fold, the seam, whatever, will usually line up to this first little notch right here at the front. So that's kind of what I'm lining up. I know the angle shows it a little different, but that's kind of what I'm lining up when I normally do it. But for this guy, if you're doing a buttonhole in the middle of the fabric or anything like that, what I am doing is I'm positioning this little T mark here, this little cross mark at the bottom. Usually on a pattern, it'll look like a big capital I with one at each end. But I'm putting this cross mark right into this needle opening. And this little line here is going all the way straight up. There is absolutely nothing wrong as well as marking this line all the way down and having the little cross mark where you start and using an extended line to help you visually. Remember, this is your area. You can mark this however you want. You don't have to mark it the way I'm doing. You don't have to mark it the way the pattern tells you. The pattern is just a guide for spacing. So whatever you like to do that's going to make it easier for you, remember, sewing is a joy. And if you're not having joy, start changing some of the rules because you can do things as you want. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to give it some gas. I'm going to hit the foot pedal. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to, I should probably mark before I start. Yeah, I forgot. I'm so used to using my Sensormatic buttonhole that, whoops, so I'm just going to go ahead and mark a mark at the end. I'm so used to using my Sensormatic buttonhole. So I'm going to start this over. This is what happens when you work from home alone, is we don't have anybody to bounce off. And when you are, sometimes when you're working by yourself, your mind will automatically do what it needs to do and forget that there's other people that are going to be looking at this. All right. So one of the things too that I want to show is because I started that buttonhole, oops, wrong one. Because I started that buttonhole and I started a couple of stitches and then I stopped and I want to move on. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select the stitch restart, which looks like a half a square on its point with a little line at the top. This will start that stitch over again. Okay. Let me move back to the one I just marked because I see that I didn't. All right. So I've got, again, my little hash mark in there. and my little cross in there. My little line here, let me show you this. Ugh, I've got my foot off there. The little line, this part of my line here is actually lined up with this part of my toe. So it's lined up with this. This is my long skinny toe, my big fat toe. So that line is kind of lined up with the edge of this big fat toe here. Okay. So here we go. So I'm going to come on up till I get to the mark at the top. So I'm starting to slow down. When I get to the mark at the top, that is when I'm going to go ahead and hold on to your stomachs. I'm going to move. I'm going to touch the reverse button. And now when I come down, he's going to come down to do the bar tack and come down and do the other side. Now when I come down to the bottom, I will do the same thing and hit the reverse button again. And it will do the bar tack at the end. We'll tie off, and then I can hit my scissors. Okay. Ooh, ah, wow. I'm going to do that again. So one of the things, whoops, I'm not going to do that again. I'm going to show you something here. So I'm going to change my view, make sure you can see this. Is up here, you will see that this little icon changed. If I touch this, it's now going to make these up. Nope, it's. Don't mind me. I just had a stupid attack. All right. So I'm going to have to make it over again. But then once you've made it that first time, it will repeat the same buttonhole again. Because I touched it, I told it I wanted to redo the buttonhole. So I'm going to redo the buttonhole, and then I will show you. I'm going to come down, get this in position. I'm going to go ahead and give it some gas. I'm going to go ahead and take my reverse. There's my bar tack. My reverse. And does a tie off. I'm going to hit my scissors. And I will usually just come and slide over. Sometimes I don't cut. I will just come and slide over. And then I'll trim everything later. Let me make sure I'm straight here. So now I'm just going to go. And it's doing the reverse automatically. And it will do the last bar tack automatically. And it'll do a tie off. So yeah, usually when I do this at home, I will just come and slide and then just trim these later in between. So either way will work for you. So any questions about that? Come on, I like questions. Okay. So now I want to talk about the Sensormatic buttonhole. So I'm going to take this guy off. Now the Sensormatic buttonhole will pop on like so. Yes, that is the right way. Got a little confused there for a second. And then there's also, in the back of your machine here, on the back of any of the PFAFF machines that use the Sensormatic buttonhole, you will plug this into the back. There's a little port, so you would just come plug it into the back there. If it needs to be a heavy duty buttonhole, what can I do? All right, I will answer that in just a moment. But yes, I will answer that. Okay. Now on this one, where's my other? Let me do my little marks. So someone said, I just followed along on the icon too. Great that it makes the next one exactly the same. So that is, I'm telling you, it's really awesome. But wait until I show you with embroidery. If you've never done buttonholes with embroidery, you're going to die. It is so awesome. So let's get to that. Most of these videos are for the creative icon. There is very little for my performance. Yes, so when it comes to the embroidery side of things, yes, you have to have an embroidery machine. But for the sewing, much of the sewing will work all the way down the line. So the creative icon, the performance icon, many of the commands and stuff are very similar on the creative icons. But I will definitely make a note of that. My team and I will talk about it and see if we can get more sewing only stuff for you guys. All right. So. All right. So now in this one, I marked my buttonholes. So these are going to be where my buttonholes, I want my buttonholes to start. But this is the sensor buttonhole. So this one, I don't have to mark the end of it. I just need to mark where I want them to start. I'm going to come on over here. Now, when I have my, let me change my view so you guys don't get seasick. Now, again, on different machines, this will be in different spots. Now, the creative icon, the performance icon, and the creative icon 2, we have this nice large screen. Some of you may have a screen up at the top, and you'll just look for these icons, but they will be up there. In many of them, you're going to be looking for it in the stitch edit. Some of the stitch edit buttons will be up at the top screen, etc. But you're going to look for the stitch edit. But when we have a sensor buttonhole foot, it's still letting us know it's going to start at the bottom and go up. But if we come to stitch edit, we get a different icon here. And one of these is, you'll see under stitch length, it shows this a button image. Yes, this is the same on the icon 1. But it'll show a button image here. And there's the number 16. The 16 is the size of the button. So when you purchase buttons, if you purchase buttons on packages or on cards, on the back, it will tell you in inches and in millimeters how big that button is. So that's a great reference. If you don't have them, if you have loose buttons like this, and you don't always know the size of it, on either your little pull-up, your cover for your thread base, on the side over here, way over to the other side, there's usually a little teeny ruler there, and it has a little like button symbol. That is for measuring a button. You can lay a button right on there and see how big it is. You can, this is what I often will do, is if you take a piece of thread and if you wrap it around the widest part of the button. So if you have a decorative button that's a funny shape or anything like that, you're going to wrap it around the widest part of the button. And this, you will measure this little bit. You'll just leave it folded. But this little bit from here to here, that's the size of the button. So you would measure your thread, that loop, and that will give you the size of the button. Okay, so let me back up because there was some. So a question about using the restart button. So the reason I pointed out the restart button was I had started the stitch and realized I'd made an error. So I removed my fabric, and I could have either touched the buttonhole stitch again to start over, or you could touch the stitch restart button. The stitch restart button will start whatever stitch you have selected. It'll just start it over. So I wasn't using it as part of the buttonhole. I just touched restart to restart the buttonhole because I was in the middle. I had started the stitch. So I wanted to restart it from the beginning. And if that doesn't answer the question, can you try rephrasing the question? And I will get back to that. Let's see what I had trouble with the Sensormatic buttonhole on twill fabric. It bunched up. Should I have disengaged the IDT? Most certainly. You're not going to use the integrated dual feed with or dual feed technology with buttonhole foot. So yes, most certainly turn it off. With twill, make sure that you're interfacing the fabric like you would for anything else. And make sure, like I said earlier, make sure that the weight of the interfacing that you use is appropriate for the weight of the fabric. So if your interfacing is really, really light and your twill is somewhat heavy, it's basically useless. So make sure that your interfacing matches the weight of your fabric. Also, you can try putting a layer of like a strip of stabilizer. So if you're an embroiderer, save those scraps. This is what I use them for. So if you just need a strip of I'll just cut a strip of some of my leftover stabilizer and lie that right underneath the strip where I'm putting my buttonholes and do that. That will also help stabilize it from the back if you're having trouble. And then I also, again, recommend a topper as well. So I hope that answers the questions. And if you've tried those things and still not getting good results, let me know. But yes, most certainly turn off the integrated dual feed because it doesn't like it. Okay. My buttons come from cans from garage sales. Yeah, I do the same thing. I often buy, especially when it comes to like shirting buttons, I usually buy them by the scoopful rather than packages so they can be different sizes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually, all right, so I'm changing the subject. Were you looking at that foot the whole time? I'm so sorry. I'm changing the subject, so I'm going back to my screen, and I'm going to talk more about the screen. So I'm going to change my buttonhole size to 22. Oops, I will get to that. Cancel. I'm touching in the wrong place. There we go. So I'm going to change my button to 22. And who was asking me about somebody mentioned something about the heavy duty. So this is one way we can kind of start compensating for the heavy duty is I can actually change my width a little bit. So I can make my width a little wider. And when I do that, I can use a heavier thread. So you can try using like a 30 weight thread and see if that will work because the stitches will now be a little bit bolder. And then I'm going to talk about density in a minute. So I will come back to that with the density. But you can give that a go and just make it a wider stitch. So basically with the heavier fabric, it just needs more to grab onto. So that's one thing that you can try. I'm going to put this back to normal. Down here on most of your, many of your electronic machines, meaning you have that push button and a little screen at the top and all that kind of stuff. And if you have a Sensormatic buttonhole with this icon that lights up, you will most likely have a little switch, a toggle, a button, something next to it, which will allow us to change our density. Like I said, I would come back to that. The density is going to change how tightly or loosely these buttons buttonhole stitches will stitch together. So for those of you that may be taking notes, the bigger the number, the more space in between stitches. So the bigger the number, the more space. The smaller the number, the less space. So for the heavy duty fabric, this could be another thing that you could try. You could try increasing the, whoops, I'm gonna come back to here. I keep looking at the wrong screen. That's why I keep misfiring. When I look at this screen here, I'm good. When I look at the camera, the TV over there, to see what you're seeing, not so good. So that's why I keep doing that. All right, so I'm gonna come back to my density and I'm going to pop it up a bit. And I'm gonna really pop it up so that you can actually see what it looks like. And then I go back. But that's another thing that you could do is just, I've increased it quite a bit, but if you increase it just a bit, just like one notch, that with the heavier thread should give you a better looking buttonhole. But just be sure to experiment. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and give this a start. So I'm going to be starting here where the little crosshatch is. On the Sensormatic buttonhole foot, you've got this slider here going on. And there's a little red arrow. So we want to slide everything all the way to the back. And if you'll notice, there is this little notch here. We're going to line up the notch with the little red arrow. And we're going to line up this. And I'm putting my little crosshatch right into that needle opening there. So you with me so far? Everybody good? All right. And in this case, what I will do is I'm going to go ahead and touch the start-stop function button, and I will let the machine do it. So if you have the start-stop function button, I love it. If you're nervous, you can still use your foot pedal. And if you're going to use the start-stop function button, don't be afraid to turn the speed down. You can do that as well. I'll turn mine down a little bit, only because it freaks people out when I do it. Full blast. So this one will do it automatically. I also want you to notice that as it's going, how would you use cord to reinforce a heavy buttonhole? That is another fantastic question, and I will definitely show that. So what I'm going to do here is, because I've done this, and as you can see, because of that density, I changed the density, you can see that it is added more space. So here is the manual buttonhole versus the denser. I mean the less dense. But you can see how now there's space for a heavier thread, right? Also, I wanted you to notice the difference here is, even though this manual buttonhole does a beautiful job, it does stitch up, stitch across, and then stitch down. With the Sensormatic, and I want you to look at it when it does it again, what the Sensormatic does is it runs a stitch and it comes down. And then it runs a stitch and it comes down. So they're perfectly balanced on both sides. So it is just gorgeous. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here and I'm going to change my density, and I'm going to turn my density down to a 3. And I'm going to do this buttonhole again. So I'm going to line up my button. Get everything lined up. And I'll touch my start stop. So it did the straight stitch and it's coming back down. And it's doing the straight stitch and then it's going to come back down. So here you can see how the density changed. So I can make less dense, more dense. So very, very cool. Yes? All right. I'm going to have you take a look at this real quick while I grab some cording. Or maybe I have some right here. Let me see. No such luck. All right. So this is, let me change the view here. So this is a outfit skirt that I made for my granddaughter. And of course she never got it. All right, so I just grabbed heavy thread rather than cording, but I will show you how to do it. All right. So it's like talk amongst yourselves. So I'm going to show you on the different feet. So if you want to use heavy cording, go ahead and unplug this. So with all three of these feet, you can do it. So if you'll notice here, I'll get this one. This one, if you'll notice, there's a little pokey out at the back. So this little guy here will allow me to wrap cording so that I can position it under the foot. And I'll show you how to do it. You'll notice that this guy also has it. And this one it also has it. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to do the cording. Now, ideally, I would use the right coloring and all that kind of stuff. But I will show you. So what is the metering button? Can you clarify that question for me? Because I don't quite understand what it is you're asking. How is the button size determined with the Sensormatic? I will show you once again. So I'm going to come here, position, and whoops, there we go. So on the Sensormatic, when you select the button and you have a Sensormatic foot that you plug in, one of the icons in your edit is going to be this little icon here. And this is the size of the button. You see how there's a little, I keep doing it because I keep looking at the monitor. But this little button, there's a little button icon here. And this is where you're going to select the size of your button. Now, there's lots of ways to measure your button. Some of the PFAFFs have on the top of their top cover, all the way over to the right, there's a little teeny millimeter ruler there, and it has a little circle, kind of a button placement, it's a guide to help you measure your buttons. So if you don't know the size of your button. On the Creative Icon 2, we have it here, and it's right on our, no, it's not. I didn't even notice it because I don't use it very often. But on the Creative Icon 2, we do have a ruler right on the front, on the front of our accessory tray. So you can lay your button down here, and each one of these little marks is a millimeter. So if we come down here, and the nice thing is that this is, the millimeters are just divisible by 10 or multiples of 10. So if I have, there's one, sorry, there's, oh, I have another ruler. Let me get it. I'll show you at the end. I'll go grab that later because it's a little easier to see than what I'm trying to do here. But there's 5, 10, 15. So it's like, so 5, 10, 15, 16. This is 17 millimeters based on this. All right, but I will get a better ruler. So stick around towards the end. I will go grab my other ruler and show it to you and see if we can get a better view. Because that you're not seeing very well. All right. Okay, so the cording. So let me finish the cording here on this buttonhole, and then I will answer the questions that have just popped up. Okay, so I've just grabbed some heavy thread. We're going to use this as cording, but I would highly recommend to use cording. Let me change my view so you can get a better view. So on the back of the buttonhole foot, there is the little guide here. So I would just take my cording and just wrap it around the end of my guide. This works better when it's attached to the machine, but you're not going to be able to see it. And just kind of pull everything forward. So do you see how that just kind of tucks in? Now on the manual, it's great. It has these little grooves in there so that when you pull it forward, they just fit right into the little grooves. Let me show you. I'm going to grab this. So I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to have this guy come back, and I'm going to hook onto untangle my fingers here. I'm making this look harder than it is because, as always, I'm working around the camera. There we go. So let me get into position. What I'm going to do is I'm going to, there we go, get into position. And then I'm going to go ahead and use my foot for this just because hello live TV. Yeah, and you are in the wrong spot. There we go. Straighten you back out. Why are you misbehaving? Stop it. I'm trying to show you how easy you are. So stop being naughty. No, wrong button. So I'm going to show you this on the manual buttonhole only because I'm having trouble seeing around the camera to get the hook on the back. So you guys won't have the same trouble that I'm having. But this one, it's just trying to get around the hook in the back. I can't see it to make sure I've got it in position. So to answer the restart button, so here I'm in the middle of the stitch. So I'm just going to touch my restart button and it starts my stitch all over again. So for this guy, I'm just going to, you're going to see how much easier it is for me to get this guy. So on the Sensormatic, I do use it. It's just working around the camera. So I'm going to go ahead and use my start stop because I know I'm good here. Oh, I don't want to. So I will go away. I don't want the Sensormatic button. Just wanted me to load the stitch. It was still programmed. It was still programmed for the Sensormatic buttonhole, but And this is this is as easy as how it will be on the Sensormatic buttonhole foot. If you're not working around the camera. Okay. And as usual, I'm running out of time. So here you can see that what this does is it, again, if you have cording, it will actually raise the buttonhole a bit. So it gives it a really nice look. And I would just come and give this tail a tug, and it'll just pull it right in. And then you can just come and trim these away. And it does make a beautiful corded buttonhole foot. Let me get some of these questions. So that is how I use the cord. We'll talk about the size in a bit. Okay, so let me come back over here. So, this metering. So this is actually the active stitch technology. So when you're in like a straight stitch, you would see the tension. So when active stitch technology is engaged, a thread metering system, it meters out the thread as it's needed. So if it needs more thread, it gives more. And if it needs less, it will give less. So it's a really great system. And many of the newer PFAFF machines do have the active stitch technology. And you do have the ability to turn it off if you don't want to use it for certain things, depending on how you're doing it. But it is a wonderful feature that it just kind of does things automatically. So if you have a waistband at the end, how... So explain to me what you're doing with the waistband and a buttonhole. Because usually if a waistband has elastic, it's connected to part of the waistband that doesn't have elastic, and that's the part you would attach the buttonhole to. So can you give me an example of what you're making that you're doing? Because I've never sewn a buttonhole onto an elastic waistband that I can remember. If I have not got a flat fabric seam, my buttonholes do not match. So if your fabric is different, if you're going over hills and valleys or with a buttonhole, yes, you're going to have trouble making them match because it has to feed back and forth. So I would work very hard on keeping the fabric flat. If not, I know if you don't have an embroidery machine, you don't want to hear that you need an embroidery machine, but I'm telling you, you need an embroidery machine. Because one of the things that once I got an embroidery machine and somebody showed me how to do buttonholes on embroidery, I have never looked back. So I know how to do buttonholes, as you can see, and I have used buttonholes, the single buttonholes occasionally. But for the most part, if I have to put a row of buttonholes on anything, I'm using my embroidery. And so I'm going to show you just how easy that is. All right. So I'm going to come over here. I'm not going to stitch it out, but I will show you how easy it is. And then I come back to, sorry. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over to my embroidery. I'm not going to stitch. All right. So one of the things is when you are in the creative icon or the PFAFF creative machines, the creative means embroidery. So we're in a creative machine, meaning it's an embroidery machine. And in the embroidery, we have designs, which is usually our little flower or butterfly. We have fonts, which is usually identified with the letter A. And then there's also the zigzag, and those are our stitches. And so if I come to my stitches, I can select my stitches just like I would in sewing. And so it'll drop it right onto the screen. All right. Now, if I come down here, there's a button that says Edit Stitch. Now, if I touch Edit Stitch, you're going to see, look at that. It is just like my sewing side. So I can tell it what size buttonhole I want. I can change the density. And what I love about embroidered buttonholes is I can make the density tighter than I normally would. So I go down pretty much as low as I can. And I'm going to go ahead and close that. I'm going to change my hoop size because I want to, let's say I'm doing a shirt and I want to do all down the front of the shirt. So I'm going to come on over to my shape creator. So it's shape creator. And I'm going to choose a shape. And I want a basic straight line. Close that. So I want my basic straight line. I'm going to do a vertical shirt where I want the buttonholes to come down the front of the shirt. So I will go into Edit Shape. And I'm going to rotate that 90 degrees. So here I can come and I can make it the size that I need it to be and all that kind of stuff. I can tell it how many buttonholes I want to do. In this case, I'm going to do 5. 5 perfectly placed buttonholes. How easy is that? But let's say I want the buttonholes to go the other way. So we can do that as well. Oops, wrong way. So just with a touch of a button, I can go vertical or horizontal. All right. Now let's say I wanted to add designs. So this is one thing that PFAFF does that most other brands don't, is if I want to come in and I want to add an embroidery design, like so. And it will put the other design here. So I've got a buttonhole and I have an embroidery. Now, if I add here, it's just going to add to the last design I chose. But that's not what I want. I want to go back and forth. I'll go back to 2. So here's one of the things that, now on this one, the Creative Icon 2, this is what the icon looks like. It's a little square with a triangle and a square within it. On the older models, you will see like a square and a triangle one on top of each other. But what that will do is it'll either repeat the last design I did, so it'll just keep adding that, or if I select the alternate, now when I add stitches, it'll add the first one, the second one, the first one, the second one. If I put more than one, it will go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, etc. So now when I go 3, I'll get a buttonhole and I'll get a flower. And I'll get a buttonhole and I'll get a flower. And I can put as many of these designs as I want, and it will do it in that order. Okay. So now let's take a closer look at this skirt that I had you guys looking at. Because that's exactly how I did the buttonholes on this skirt. There you go. You see there's the buttonholes with the flower, the buttonholes with the flower. So it's exactly how I did this guy here. Now, when it comes to the elastic, see, here's what I'm talking about. Well, there's elastic here, but it's stitched to a flat front band, which is where I can add the single buttonhole here. So I'm really confused about that question. What buttonhole would you use for a jacket? So when it comes to jackets, jackets usually have the buttonholes with the shank on the back. because they need some room for that fabric to fit under them. So when you work with a button that has a shank on it, you will pretty much always want to use a keyhole buttonhole. So a keyhole buttonhole, if you're unfamiliar, looks like these guys. So this would be a keyhole buttonhole. Oops, I'm just adding keyhole buttonholes here. I'm going to do this. But this would be a keyhole buttonhole. And a keyhole buttonhole has the big opening at the one end. And that will allow, that little opening allows for the shank. And often when you will get one of these little cutters, it will also usually come with a keyhole popper there too. So you can create the hole for the keyhole as well as the shank. All right. Now I'm going to, speaking of which, I would like to show how to use this. So one of the things when using this is you can use a seam ripper. Now, if you want to use a seam ripper, I strongly recommend putting a pin at the end because the buttonholes are usually the last thing you're going to put on your project. And it really, really, really is a sad day when your seam ripper goes too far. Ask me how I know that. Don't do it without the pin. But this one is, the chisel is great. So with the chisel, you can just come down and I just kind of start with one of the pointy ends where I want to go, and I'll just chisel down. My chisel is about 200 years old, so it's getting a little long in the tooth. Getting a little dull. But when you do the chisel, you see how nicely that opens? So very, very cool. The other thing that I will sometimes do, and this is why I like a sharp point, is I will open up my button, just give it a little snip here. And then I will come and physically trim to the point where I want to go. And I will come and flip it over and do the same thing on the other end. But this is where I usually will add like a fray block, fray check, or a fray stop on my buttonhole before I cut it. So I will get that on, let it dry, it just takes a few minutes, and then I cut. That will prevent any of these little loose threads, like you're starting to see here, from coming through. So you see how there's these loose threads trying to come through? All right. So let me see. So the keyhole buttonhole. Does the cord go through the front of the teeth? So the cord on, let's see, look at another piece of thread here. So we're going to, so does the cord come through the front teeth on the Sensormatic? My Sensormatic. So on the Sensormatic, you want to make sure that it gets on here, and it will, oh, you want these, you could do that. That actually, I've never done that, but I guess you could. I usually just hold it, and it works usually just fine. But yeah. So hold that onto that. But you see how it get right in position. All right. What are times you would use cording in garments? So the cording in the garments is really great for the heavier duty stuff. So if you're going to do pants, jackets, bags, where you just want that reinforced, more stable buttonhole. So like if you look at, I know we all have the opportunity to go look at like, classic hand-tailored suits. But if you were to look at or Google hand-tailored suits and hand-tailored buttonholes, they're actually these beautifully bound buttonholes. They do it all by hand, which forget that. But they're beautifully bound buttonholes. The thing is, using the cording can achieve a very similar look without doing all the hand work involved. So if you're really curious, go take a look at some hand-tailored buttonholes, and you will see that's what we're trying to simulate when we add cording to the buttonhole. Okay. How would you hold the garment down? So normally when you are making projects, you're going to put the buttonholes whenever you can. So like, for instance, for me, because remember I said that sewing isn't supposed to be a joy. So I would often struggle with the big project going out. So usually once I'd finish that piece, for instance, a shirt that I'm working on, once I get the placket down, then I will add the buttonholes. So I'm just working on that smaller piece. And it's the same when I'm working on a bag or anything, a home deck or anything. I will usually add the buttonholes to the piece before I finish putting it together. So sometimes I just have to think about working it through a little bit first. What do I need to do before I move on to the next stitch? Can I get the next step? Can I get my buttonholes in? So like, yeah, I had my buttonholes on here before I added my waistband. So I wasn't working around anything. You can also bring in buttonholes from the software and create really interesting things. So whether you're using the buttonholes on the machine or the buttonholes on the software, there's a lot that you can do with decorative, with garments, with home decks, with bags. Okay. So how would you hold the garment down in embroidery? Is that what we're talking about? Is that what you're talking about? So that is a very good question. And I still want to get that little ruler. So when it comes down to holding the garment down in embroidery so I would hoop my stabilizer, right? I hoop my stabilizer. And then I personally use a spray adhesive. So like 505, KK2000, something like that. Although we have the tacky tearaway, so you put it in and you peel the backing away and it's now sticky. So you can do that. There's also Aqua Magic Plus. No, there is. It'll come to me. It'll come back around. I'll throw it in the comments. I can't remember it right now. But yeah, no, Aqua Magic Plus does have the sticky. Sorry, I am in the right thing. And you can hoop that and pull that away as well. And then I just lay that in, and then I would run a basting stitch. So I have so here would be my placket. Okay. So here'd be like my shirt placket, for instance. Okay. So I have my marks on my hoops. So I would mark my, position it where I would be centered down the best that I could. And then I would baste around the design, which will usually run a basting stitch right around the design. You can also use your precise positioning. So once I got my basting down, then I will come and use my precise positioning to make sure that my line is as perfectly straight as I want it to be. And then even if I have to adjust it with the basting's coming out later. So between the tacky here, either the spray adhesive, the sticky back stabilizers, and the basting, and then it'll stitch it. And then this is where the cool thing happens. So then I would remove the basting, and then I pull out just this part. So now I've got all these little holes here. I can take another just little strip of stabilizer and just put the strip down there on the holes and do it again. So I'm not having to re-hoop every time. I can just peel it up and just move on. Peel it, patch it, and move on to the next. So I can do just mountains of buttonholes really, really quick and easy. So like I do them on home decks, I do them on clothing, I do them on bags. There was so much more that I wanted to show you that I should probably do a second buttonhole Facebook Live more to the embroidery side. So I do want to thank you guys for coming. I thank you for putting me. Let's see. Wait a minute. I got a couple more. Would you please repeat the embroidery setup slower? Okay, I will do that. And what is the blue tape for? The blue tape is, so there's tape that you can use for like in the hoop projects, and sometimes when I'm working on something and I'll have some little piece of the, let me untie my tongue and start that sentence over again. Sometimes when I'm working on a floating, and even when I baste it, I will have a piece of the edge that wants to curl in. So you can use painter's tape. There is the fabric tape, etc. That's all that was. That was left over from a project where I had taped something down and just left it up. So I will repeat the steps for the embroidery buttonholes. But before I do that, I want to remind everybody to join us for the next MySewNet Facebook Live on Wednesday, July 13th at 2 p.m. Central, 3 p.m. Eastern. And this is the MySewNet Live. And it is with one of our new educators, Wendy Owens. And if you've watched one of the previous MySewNet Live, we met her when we were all together and did a Facebook Live together. And she will be talking about digitizing applique. So if you're interested in the MySewNet embroidery, check that out. And then the next PFAFF Facebook Live is Thursday, July 21st. And that is with Karen Charles. And she is going to be exploring Stitch Creator. Now, Stitch Creator is why I bought my first PFAFF in the first place, because Stitch Creator is amazing. And it's really fun. And it's once it gets demystified, it's amazing. So be sure to tune in to that. So I'm going to go ahead back over to my screen real quick. I know I'm running way over time, but I'm going to run over to my screen real quick, and I will walk through a little bit slower the steps to the buttonhole. So I'm going to go to my edit design, and I'm going to zoom back out. And I'm just going to go ahead and delete all. All right. So step one, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to come over to my embroidery, and I'm going to select a stitch. So I can select design, I can select font, or I can select stitch. I will go to the stitch that I want to select. In this case, I'm just going to center it so you can see it. If we come down to Stitch Edit will allow us to edit the stitch. So I can make it the size of the button I want. I can change the density. I can do all that. So once I've done that, then I'm going to change my hoop, make sure I'm in a big enough hoop. Because when you bring in a design, it will always default to the smallest hoop that it can. So immediately I need to change my hoop to the big size. Now we're going to Stitch Creator. And I'm going to load a shape. And I'm going to go to Basic and a straight line. And then I'm going to close. And I'm going to go to Edit Shape. And I want to rotate 90 degrees. And then I'm not going to worry about the measurements. I will do a embroidered buttonhole live, and we'll talk more about this kind of measurements on how to make sure this is all the right size, etc. Then you make it the size that you want, and then I can just plus how many buttonholes I want. And then if you come down into positioning is where we can change it from horizontal to vertical. And does that answer that question? So I will definitely, apparently there was a lot of you going, yes, 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 for the embroidered buttonhole live. So we will definitely put that on the schedule. And from the previous commenter earlier, we will talk about adding some more sewing stuff for the non-embroiderers. Although I think, my world, everybody should be embroidering, even though I do get it. But we will kind of try to be more inclusive. So once again, I want to thank you for coming. I hope I got everybody's questions. I will be going through the comments in a little bit to make sure I didn't miss anything. If you have more questions later, feel free to come back to this Facebook and ask questions because we're always watching. And I really, really appreciate you joining me here today. And I will talk to you guys soon. All right. Bye.